Okay, very happy to be back with Ron Thomson, former warden, Wankie National Park. To my mind, one of the most knowledgeable wildlife conservationists in Africa. And Ron, it's a real pleasure to be back with you, and thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
Ron, man, you've got two new books which we're going to talk about. One's Game Rangers at War, and one's about the spirit mediums. I just want to jump right in and get you going. My recollection around 1972, when the Zanla forces were regrouping in Mozambique, a key element of that campaign was getting the spirit mediums on their side. And some very serious work went into making sure that those people were politicized and firmly in the enemy camp. Can you just give us a bit of background to that whole series of events?
Well, in the 1970s, the big movement was actually from Zipra, from Lusaka, crossing Lake Kariba into Kariba district and into the Binga district. And they were coming over with Zambian fishermen in their boats and crossing over during the period of the full moon, because that's when the terrorists could walk at night without any requirement for a torch. They could see where they were going, and inevitably, when you had full moons, you had these guys coming over from Zambia. The same sort of thing was obviously happening elsewhere, but in those days, I had nothing to do with Mozambique. I was all at in the Binga district.
Ron, yeah, but just get on to the importance of the spirit mediums in the guerrilla campaign.
The main use of spirit mediums was actually up in the northeast in the Mount Darwin area. And what happened, what it was that people of importance during their life, and who had developed some kind of religious attitudes to their living. When they died, they went up into the spirit world, and then living people in the communities then acted as priests, if you like. They called them Zvikiros, and they were able to communicate with the dead. So you had people like Nanda, for example, who was the young sister of the king of the time, who was Monomotapa. She went up to the spirit world then because, as far as I'm concerned, her brother had her murdered. He wanted to be king of the Mashona people, and in those days, the Mashona nation in Mashonaland up there comprised about 15 or 16 chiefs, and there were chieftains all over. And the Monomotapa saw an opportunity here to be the persona to take all these people and combine them into one nation, and that is the Mashona nation. And he had trouble getting the Mashonas to agree to this. So he then started with his ideas of a spirit world, and he said that any person who was worthy of being a king of the Mashona people, they would have to challenge the world in such a way that the people would have as part of their religion, that if anybody wanted to be king, he had to be able to put his life at risk and to have the people challenge him for the validity of the strength of his spiritual being. And to do that, what he contrived before he was actually declared king. You must have heard of the Monomotapa.
Yes.
The one of Matapa's got a hotel named after him in Harare now. But he actually came. He wasn't a Mashona. He came from a place that the local African people referred to as the place of the long grass. And he came with his family, including his sister Nyamhita, into what was Zimbabwe then. And he immediately started maneuvering for being declared king. So he declared that one of the tribal taboos that warranted the people killing their would-be king would be the crime of incest. So he arranged with his sister Nyamhita that they would have sex together, and this was considered to be taboo. Incest was considered to be taboo. He then arranged this, and Tabita reneged against this whole thing. She didn't like it at all. And she told everybody what had gone on, that her brother had actually raped her. And the king, the would-be king, Monomatapa, then put it out that the crime had been committed, and he was prepared to get any single member of the Mashona community could come and fight with him and kill him for having committed this offense against the religion of the Mashona people. And he got no takers. But he was able through that to be able to declare himself to be king, because he reckons he had committed the offense, and nobody in the kingdom was prepared to challenge him. And Nehanda, being the sister and being the person who had given him the power to be king, she was given a reward by Monomatapa to be the sabuku, the chief of a village down in the Zambezi Valley, and she then became something of an embarrassment to him, because she continued to speak badly of him and the fact that he had actually raped her. It hadn't been just straightforward incest. So he then sent a group of his people down the valley, a group of his loyal warriors. They went down and they found where she was living, and she disappeared. She quietly disappeared. And what had happened was that they went down and murdered her, but they never found her body. But there was a rock in the hillside near where her village was, which had an imprint, a granite rock, had an imprint the same shape as a woman's apron. And it was the kind of apron that Nehanda used to wear. So they said that she had just disappeared into the rocks. The rocks had absorbed her. So there's a lot of spirituality coming into these ideas and imagination. And anyway, she disappeared, and everybody didn't know where she'd gone. They started thinking the king maybe had murdered her, which of course he had, but it didn't come out like that. And she went up into the spirit world. Now the Mashona people are full of spirits and spirit worlds and things. It's all part of their psyche. And this woman's name was Nyamhita, and the province that she had been given by the Monomatapa was the province of Handa. So she became known as Nyamhita Nehanda, that is Nyamhita of the district of Nehanda, which she then governed. And that eventually collapsed into just being called Nehanda. So she became known as Nehanda. And when she disappeared, she reappeared apparently up in the spirit world, in a very important part of the spirit world, where she became known simply as Nehanda. And from there, she was able to control the Mashona people through the spirits in the spirit world up there. And she actually became more powerful than the king himself. And when he died, and he went up to heaven, and he went into the spirit world up there, he found that she had in fact usurped him. She had taken over the most important seat up there in the spirit world, and she became the Mashona people's most powerful spirit. Now,
So,
there are
Ron,
lots of spirits.
can I just jump in there? How was this information from the spiritual world being relayed to the mortals on the ground? How does this information come to you now?
They have a system up there where they've got spirit mediums. These are ordinary witch doctors who have got a propensity or an imagination and the ability to pass these stories over to the people of what is going on in the spirit world, and the messages sent down from Nanda to the living people on the ground. And these people who came down, these witch doctors, were special witch doctors who had the ability to communicate with the dead.
Right.
And they became known as Zvikiros.
Mm-hmm.
Zvikiros.
And
so you had Zvikiro Nanda.
And Rona, these are the people that interacted with the Zanla guys and gave them supernatural powers, I take it.
No, but they backed the Zanla Zvakomana, the Zanla terrorists. They backed them amongst the Mashona people.
Right.
So that when they discussed things with the Mashona people, they said, listen, you guys, you had better look after Nanda when she comes down here. You've got to look after, because she is the ruling roost, and she tells you that this is what you've got to do.
Right.
She's the one who told us that we've got to get rid of the white man, and we have to get the Zvakomana of Zanla, the young men of Zanla, the freedom fighters of Zanla. They have to be looked after by you Mashona people. Now, being looked after means that you have to take them into your homes, you have to feed them, you have to make them part of your families, you have to learn as the Chinese taught them, because the Zanla were taught by the Chinese. Zipra, the Ndebele terrorists, were taught by the Russians. The Chinese taught them that if they wanted to win the war, they would have to learn how to swim amongst the people. They would have to live in the villages and be protected by the people. But they called it swimming amongst the people. And so there were these messages passed down through the Zvikiros. The Zvikiros often had sessions with the local chiefs and people where they spoke to the spirits up in the top, and the spirits gave them instructions down via the Zvikiros to the people living on the ground. That's how the communication took place. The Mashona people were very, very hot on their spirit mediums.
Yes. Yes, this was a pivotal point, I think, in motivating the masses in the northeast of the country to mobilize against the government of the day. So this whole connection to the spirit mediums and the spiritual world was a crucial part of the enemy campaign.
And it was part of what the Chinese wrote into their training of the Zanla cadres. They told them in no uncertain terms that if you want to win this war, you have got to swim amongst the people. You've got to be part of the people. And the people, the chiefs and chieftains and other Zvikiros were taught this by these Zvikiros from the messages from the afterworld. Tell them that they had to look after the terrorists, the Zanla terrorists, when they came into their villages. They had to be looked after.
Ron, I don't know if you remember the sequence of events, but there were two very prominent enemy operators by the name of James Bond and Mao, who established themselves, made themselves famous or notorious, whichever side you come from, in the Northeast. And the word that was out was that they were impervious to enemy fire, and that bullets were turned to water. So they were basically protected. And after the two of them were killed, there was a there was a very energetic campaign to move these bodies around, if I remember correctly. They wanted as many of the locals in what became the Oparican area to see these corpses to try and get the message across, that the story that they'd been fed about these people being protected um, by the spirits was in fact false. I don't know if you remember that sequence of events.
No, I don't, but I do remember that when the old Zvikiro Nehanda died, they were up at Chifumbo in north central Tanzania. They had a big camp up there, Chifumbo, a big Zana terrorist camp. And when she died, they dug a hole along the path that led from Chifumbo down into the northeast, into the Mount Darwin area, into that theater of the war.
Right.
And they put her body in a trench next to the path, and she was sitting in the trench, buried from the waist down, but the rest of her was very visible. And these guys had to walk past it,
yes,
and they had to pay homage to the dead body. And that was the Zvikiro Nehanda, who was the one who managed to get. She herself was taken up by her Zvikiros and by Zanla up to Chifumbo. She actually lived up there for a long time, and that's where she died. The guy down in Marabili land, there was another guy, another Zvikiro there called Mlimo, and he lived in the big religious cave on Injaleli Mountain in the Matopus National Park, and that was the sacred place. And he did much the same sort of thing, by saying that he looked after these various other people. So there's lots of this. The story we get out of this is that the Rhodesian security forces were actually having to battle a spiritual war effort as well. It wasn't just military; it was spiritual as well.
yes,
And that actually took over importance in terms of what a lot of these guys did. They were armed. Yes, they were armed with superior arms or good military weaponry, but their spirits were controlled by the spirit mediums.
yeah.
And the spirit mediums controlled the local communities and instructed them that they had to allow the Zvakomana of Zanla to be able to swim amongst the people.
Very important, a pivotal point, I suppose, in the whole story. And I think the message was going up from people in internal affairs and probably from some of the police intelligence people that this campaign was underway. But I'm not sure it was taken seriously enough by the military high command, and it looks like we might have missed the boat there a bit.
Well, I wasn't involved with that sort of thing, but I did know about it because I was in the middle of the mix all the time. But I wasn't part and parcel of any of the manipulations that Special Branch or people like that. They were the people involved with this. Special Branch in the police, they were up to their ears in it, and they had all my information came from my contacts with Special Branch.
Ron, can we switch now to? I want you to talk a bit about your book, Game Rangers at War. Have you got a copy there?
I have got it. We will go and look for it now. I've got another one here at the moment, which is the book on Nahanda. This is the full story of Nahanda.
Just hold that up. Just hold it up. Yeah. Okay. So that's all about Nahanda and the spirit mediums.
It's a fiction story, based on the truth.
Okay.
So a lot of the things that I recite in here were adventures that I actually undertook myself or which friends of mine were involved with. So it's based on the truth, but it's all it's been interwoven with the Spirit of Nahanda legend.
Interesting. Okay, Ron, show us the other one, the Game Rangers at War.
This is the Game Rangers at War.
And who's that on the cover?
It's just one of the senior trackers and his bushman tracker with him with their chopper in the background.
Interesting. Okay, Rod, tell us a bit about the book and what
Well, the Game Rangers at War um, are basically my adventures in the war as a tracker combat unit leader. I was one of the people who was there was I think that there were several people involved in the formation of the Tracker Combat Unit, the National Parks Tracker Combat Unit, and I think I was one of them. As I was with the working with me was the officer commanding the RAR soldiers in Binga in the 1970s.
right?
We discussed this between us, and he spoke to a lot of people, and I spoke to a lot of people in parks. He spoke in the military, and I was actually in the Binga district in 1974, shooting crop raiding elephants. When we bumped into a bunch of Zipra groups, and we were fired upon by them, and managed to get away without too much trouble. Then we got onto the RAR. They sent a group of guys out. They only had the one chopper, so they sent out four RAR soldiers to be our protection stick while we were there. And we picked up their tracks, and we followed them from where we had bumped into them on the Chiserira mountain range. And they went right up into the Tsetse area, and we're moving down towards Bulawayo. We kept following them, but we had a stick of 4 RAR soldiers with us, one of whom had a radio with him, and we were able to keep in touch with the commanding officer who was based in Binga. And from there, we were able to trace where these guys were going. And because I knew the ground very well, in the Sabungwi, I shot a lot of elephant in the Sabungwi on the Tsetse Ops. And I knew where all the rivers went and where the streams went and where the main pathways were. I knew all those things, which was very, very helpful. But when we've got onto these guys and we followed their tracks, we had a stick of 4 RR soldiers to protect us. The big problem with tracking is if you're looking at the ground and you're looking at footprints on the ground and you're following them along the ground, you don't have time to look ahead of you. And many was the time we damn nearly walked into their camps. But when we had a group of soldiers with us, it was their job to keep their eyes looking ahead. It was our job to keep our eyes on the ground following the tracks.
Right.
And this is where it started. And from there, we actually got the organization, the National Parks Volunteer Tracker Combat Unit, was formed. And as I say, I think a lot of other people twigged onto it at the same time. So I can't claim to be the person who.
Who were the sort of founder members, Ron? The early members of the TCU.
I don't know. It was all very individual. If you knew the local commanding officer of the army unit, he would get hold of you and say, "Listen, Ron, we've got a group of guys in. Could you come and follow them for us?" And he would give us a protection stick, and then we went in and we followed them. Mm-hmm. We were unable to get any military arms, by the way, when this happened. We went in with our 4.58 Magnums, which were our elephant guns, and we couldn't take R1 rifles and the old SLRs, which was the British equivalent of that, of the R1 7.62. We couldn't have those because there weren't enough weapons of that caliber in the war. So the RAR soldiers were armed with those weapons, but we were armed with our elephant rifles, 3.75 Magnums and those sorts of things. And what happened was that we had so much success on this that the military, the army, said, "Hey, this is a good thing." I didn't say it was a good thing. I said we can probably help you by doing this, which we did do. But the army, in backing us up with all the equipment that they also had helicopters and things which we didn't have access to. It worked for them, and they had success. And I'm not saying that we went in and we had big battles. We didn't have big battles. It was our job. It was our basic job not to fight the terrorists. It was our job to find them. And once we had found them, we very often we came under fire and we had a punch up. Very often we didn't. But if we had found them and we could give a six-figure map reference um,
Yeah.
on the radio back to the army command that was hosting us, they could send people out by aircraft, largely choppers, and engage them. And when that happened, we would fall back as a protection stick for the army
Right.
who were doing. But basically, we ran the tracker show. We did all the tracking, and we told them what was going to happen, with the army supporting us from the very beginning, until the first bullet was fired. And when that happened, we fell back and we let the army take over. And then, of course, then they sent out reinforcements. So
Ron,
that's how it started.
Ron, how did your African trackers take to this task? Because their job was they were game scouts. They were there to to do a wildlife
Now,
job.
they weren't necessarily game scouts, but from a bushcraftsman point of view, our trackers were infinitely better than our game scouts. A lot of our game scouts were just like policemen on the street corner. Um, Whereas your trackers were the people who actually did, they looked at the ground and they could tell you these tracks were here 3 hours ago or early this morning or whatever it was. Whereas your game scouts couldn't have told us that. So, and the game wardens, of course, were forever going out and hunting elephants and buffaloes and man-eating lions and things like this, and on many occasions, um, with their trackers. So they had a partnership with their trackers on doing tracking, the sort of tracking that we did in the military with them. Um, but they weren't game scouts. They were just ordinary trackers, ordinary bushmen. My guys were bushmen. A lot of them weren't bushmen. I know a lot of the rangers, the white rangers in the department, used people other than bushmen. But I used bushmen solely right throughout my career. But they were looking for tracks on the ground, and we were trying to protect them by looking ahead to make sure we didn't walk into an ambush. And the soldiers behind us were also looking ahead. They were in line abreast just behind us. We were tracking, line abreast behind us, and they were just looking to see that we weren't going to walk into an ambush, because it often happens. These guys were walking all night. They used to cross over the Lake Kariba. They cross over on a moonlit night and then walk all night, all night in the moonlight, in the bright moonlight. And during the day, they would be very tired. They would then find a place where they could lie up and rest for the whole of the day. And then sundown, they started their trekking again. And we had to follow the movements that they made during the night. We had to follow their tracks the next morning. And if you kept going, if you had a good team, you would catch up with them when they were all lying down sound asleep. I walked into a couple of places where the gooks on the ground were sound asleep, absolutely sound asleep. They had found a good place to sleep. There was shade, there was cover, and they put their heads down and they went to sleep, because come nightfall they were up walking again. And that's how it was. That's how we operated.
Where were these guys headed for? Ron, do you know, coming through that big area, what was their target and what was their mission?
Well, they had come. They had their camps at Lusaka. Their mission was to go to Bulawayo. These were Zipra. They were Ndebele's, and they were trying to get to Bulawayo. When Bulawayo, of course, was the Ndebele
Stronghold.
Central place, of course, made by Lobengula. And it means Gubulawayo was the full name, means a place of slaughter. It was the family home of King Chaka the Zulu down in Natal a long time before. And the name Gubulawayo was used by Lobengula for his royal place to stay. And so that Bulawayo was in the belly side of Rhodesia, down the bottom part. And that's where they were headed, because that's where all their support was. They wanted to get into these places with arms and ammunition, and the motive to get people to rise up, to get the indigenous, the civilian people in the towns to rise up against the Rhodesian government.
Ron, it's a while ago I did a chat with a with a former Zipra combatant. And it was quite interesting. He was very frank about the fact that they were disappointed on their initial forays from Zambia when they got into Batonka country. And the Batonkas didn't want anything to do with them. They said, we're not interested in this struggle of yours. Basically, leave us alone. And so these chaps struggled for food and water and general support. The reception they got was pretty hostile. Did you have any similar experiences?
We found that when they crossed over, being great on spirit mediums and things like that, they went in and started discussing things not with the chiefs, what have you, but with the witch doctors. And I know one particular witch doctor became bad news with us because he actually assisted them, and it took us a long time to find him and eventually pull him in, which stopped a lot of the interaction between Zipra and the witch doctors. But they thought that the Batonka were a very primitive race, which they were, of course, and not worth any effort. What they did do was they indoctrinated the Batonka people into believing that the whole Kariba episode, the whole building of Lake Kariba and the flooding of the lake and the flooding of all the Batonka houses was a white man's ploy to get rid of the Batonka. The white man didn't want the Batonka there.
Right.
So the Ndebele's managed to get that across in Batonka land. And another one of the things was that I know that the DC there, who was all the time I was there, was Ian Finley. And I know that Ian and I had long discussions on this. The traditional crop of the Batonka people was the 14-foot high, 12 to 14-foot high giant sorghum crops. They look like big sugarcane stalks sticking out. And they had these big heads of sorghum at the top. And that was their traditional crop. And it grew very well on the wet alluvial soils on the banks of the Zambezi, but it didn't work so well in the hinterland, on the dry soils of the hinterland. And the only way that the Batonka could be able to feed themselves was if they started to grow a dwarf sorghum, which was only 3 feet high. And they got good yield on those things, and they grew fast. Within 3 months, these things had heads on them. But the Ndebele taught the Batonka, said, don't be fooled by this. The white man is trying to get rid of the Batonka. You mustn't give support to the white man. And they said, well, one of the reasons that you have been given the idea that you should grow dwarf sorghums has got nothing to do with the crop itself. It's just that if you eat too much dwarf sorghums, you're not going to be able to get an erection, and you're not going to be able to make your wives pregnant. And this way, they're going to wipe out the Batonka people if you threw this dwarf sorghum. It was easy to say, well, if you got one that is 14 feet long, you're okay. If you got one's only 3 feet long, you've got a sexual problem here. It's deficiency. And that was a major battle. If we could have got the Batonkas onto, and I was involved with this because I was shooting elephants to feed these guys as well. If we could have got them onto the dwarf sorghum very early on, after Kariba filled to capacity in '63, they would have been much better fed than they actually were, because they tried to grow these giant sorghums and they wouldn't grow on this dry, gravelly soil and Kalahari sand soil. They wouldn't grow on that. They had to have black alluvial soil. But the dwarf sorghums would grow on sandy soil. That was no problem. So that's just one of the big problems that we had with the Ndebele's and the Batonka.
But Ron, am I right? Throughout the conflict years, the relationship between the Batonka and the district commissioner, who I think was Finley for a lot of that time, remained a cordial one and a respectful one.
Yes, it was. Ian Finley was what I used to say, was a typical British politician, straight upper lips, long and thin, and grey slacks and a white shirt, open neck shirt, and what have you. And he spoke with a very English accent. And yes, it was always cordial. Ian Finley was an absolute gentleman, and he really took his task to hand. It was his job to look after the Batonka people, and it wasn't always easy. I know that John Tebbit, who became my provincial warden based in Bulawayo, he came up to see us to discuss me shooting elephants for Ian Finley in order to feed the Batonkas. And national parks always wanted to have the public opinion of them that they were good guys and looked after their wildlife properly and what have you. And they felt that a lot of people felt it was wrong that national parks should be available for criticism for shooting elephants to feed the Batonka people. And the numbers of elephants that they wanted shot was astronomical. It was big numbers of elephants. They were doing a lot of damage to the crops, which was a bad thing, because the crops didn't grow very well on the soil that they were required to feed them on. And it was my job to shoot the elephants. And I had to get John Tebbit up from Bulawayo to come and have long discussions with Ian Finley to find out why it was necessary to feed the Batonkas. Because when the lake filled to capacity, there was nothing for them to eat. They couldn't grow crops.
Ron, tell us a bit more about the book and some of your escapades that you might want to just relate to whet our appetites.
Okay. Well, the Game Rangers at War story, this one here, deals with a lot of single episodes. We would be called out once every 6 weeks to go on a 6-week stint to begin with. Later on, it was the length was changed, but we went out and we went say to Mount Darwin, and we got accommodated in the sergeant's mess there. The sergeant's mess was always a good place to be. They always enjoyed us being there, and the bushmen sitting there in the evening drinking beers with the guys. And what would happen was that when the Joint Operational Command headquarters at Mount Darwin was what geared us into action. If for example, there had been a pungwi. A pungwi was a kangaroo court done by the terrorists, and they would have a bitch with a local chief, for example. This was quite common, because a lot of those chiefs didn't want the war. They wanted to be rid of the war. They were tired of it. Didn't matter where they went, they were dragged into it. Very often they would say to the local special branch policeman, listen, there's a bunch of up there in the hills in that part of the world over there. They've just come in from Chifumbo in Tanzania, and they're ready for deployment. And they're up there in the hills there. And the reason that they did that was because they actually wanted to stop the war. They wanted to do what they could to have the war stopped. And they felt that the best way of doing that was to help the white man win the war. Incongruous as this may seem now, that is in fact what it was all about. And a lot of these chiefs openly called these special branch people to one side and said, here's the story. There are 50 people up there in the hills behind that big gomo over there, and they are ready for deployment now. Now the local sectorial commander is getting ready to send them out to the different detachments in his area. But they're all there in one group there right now, ready for your attention. And the Rhodesians would go in there with normal soldiers, not with us. And they would have a punch up with these guys, and a lot of young new recruits coming into the area would be given away, and they would be engaged by the Rhodesian security forces, the RLI or the Sulu Scouts, or somebody would go up there, or a bunch of different ones, and a lot of these guys would be killed, and then it became known through the groups that such and such a chief had given away the fact that these guys were up in the hills. So the terrorists had a vendetta against the local chief then, and one way that they used to get rid of them was these chiefs, for example, they would take them and their families and push them into a hut and wire them into their hut, cover their hut in firewood and grass, and set them alight and burn the whole family. I mean, I've seen, I personally have seen up to 27 people dead in one heap, burnt to death, melted. The bodies melted together. And what would happen was that these pungwis would happen in the just after sunset. They would call all the villagers together in the area, sit them down, and then they would discuss the war that the Mbunus, that the white man had with these, and they killed 20 terrorists, or Zvakomana, or 50, or whatever the scene was. And the person, how did they know that they were there? Because the chief had told them. So they then have these kangaroo courts where the chiefs were accused with very little proof of being the culprits. To be quite honest, half the time they were the culprits. They were actually doing this. And but during the court case, the civilian court case that was conducted with the local political commissar presiding as the judge, etc., they got the people to declare the chief to be guilty of the offense of being a sellout to the white man, and they would then burn them to death. Another way, one terrible scene that I had to attend to was the guy who had his legs chopped off. But what would happen was that the Selous scouts had OPs, observation posts, all over the military area up in the northeast, up in the Darwin zone. And they had about 6 different names for the war zones given to them by Zanla. And their political commissars and the sectorial commander would run the show in there and get the people to do as they were told. And there were all sorts of things would happen. One old chief was accused of passing on information to 2 Dad's Army old soldiers who happened to by mistake walk into their kraal. And the next night, the Jock Command headquarters had a raid planned on this old chief's village because they knew that there was going to be a political meeting on his farm that night. So they knew that they would all be there, and they had these guys up on the hills observing and radioing back for weeks on end. They would sit up there passing these messages on. Then what would happen is that the sectorial commander or the political commissar would prime the people to get them to say, yes, it was the chief who did all this trouble. They would then, after they'd had the pungwi, after they had the court case, they've dragged a log into the middle of the village, and they've got all the villagers sitting around with lamps on the end of poles to give it a good aura, the lights there. And then they pulled the old man's legs over the top of the log and got his, in this case, 5 sons to chop his legs off through the shins. This was observed at night by these Selous scout observation posts. They were brilliant, absolutely brilliant, these guys. And what happened then was that they, once the legs had been chopped off the old man's, feet had been chopped off the old man's legs, the Zvakomana who were in there looking after the sectorial commander, all his bodyguard, they just bayoneted the 5 sons to death. And I was chopping out there in the morning. What would happen when you had these kind of incidents, whether somebody was burned, his whole family was burned to death, or had their legs chopped off, or something like that happened? What would happen, or even just a sighting that there had been a meeting in such and such a place? We would get called out before the dawn in the morning. The first thing that anybody in the operational command headquarters or in the sleeping quarters would hear in the early morning would sparrows to the ops room, sparrows to the ops room. Sparrows was our code name in the military, sparrows. And what that meant was I then had to get up. My whole team were sleeping in and around me in the sleeping quarters in the barracks, and I then had to go to the ops room where I was told what the incident was. The guy had his leg chopped off or whatever it was, and I then had to make my guys ready to go out and attend to it.
Mm-hmm.
And these OP guys would watch what was happening right throughout. They had brilliant night vision stuff and hearing things and what have you. And the operational command used to get 4 people, either the RLI or Selous Scouts or somebody else, but good quality troops to go out with us. One guy tried to send out Dad's army with us, and I refused. I said, I'm not going out there. These guys have got to protect us when we're doing the tracking. We don't want to be thinking about looking behind every bush. But anyway, normally the army got to know what we were like and who we liked to have with us. And the choppers would get ready, and they would send us out, 4 of us in one helicopter, a G car normally, and 4 protection stick guys in a second helicopter. Mm-hmm. And they would go out and they'd land us at the scene of wherever this thing had taken place. And then the special branch were normally already there. How they found out about this, there were good comms between special branch and Selous Scouts. And from there, we would pick up the tracks from the murders, and then we would follow them out until we caught up with them. And if we could catch up with them before they found us and before they saw us, we then called in the military, and they came in with helicopters and other aircraft, sometimes with Canberra bombers if it was a big group of them. But it was our job to follow their tracks and we'd follow them all day long. Sometimes we'd get there at the crack of dawn, and it was bloody cold at that time of the morning, being in an open helicopter with no doors on it. You were frozen stiff. And anyway, we would land and get out, and our protection stick would land and get out. We'd have a discussion on the ground there. We'd go to the special ops guy who was normally already there, because he had been brought in earlier in the morning, and he would fill us in on what's going on. We picked up the tracks and we followed them, and then we liaised all the time, because we normally had the RLI with us, or somebody like that who had direct comms back with the jock, and we told them what we had found, what we were on, how many there were, where they were, how we were following them, giving them map references and everything. And then when that happened, we would very often find these guys and lie up in the hills watching them, and get the Air Force to bring guys in, either Dakotas with paratroopers from the RLI or something like that, and they would then come in and there would be a battle royal. But we would guide them. We would guide them into these places. It wasn't our job to participate. It was our job just to find them.
Actually, Ron, funny you talk about that. My first few months in the RLI, that's exactly what I was tasked to do. We had a sort of in-house tracking team. It was a corporal by the name of Jan de Beer, who was later killed. And I ended up in his stick. So we did a lot of call-outs, those early morning call-outs to incidents. And so I also saw a few of those atrocities, and it was a real game changer for me, because as a young soldier, I arrived in the operational area thinking, there are 2 sides to the story. And I was just a little bit unsure of myself. But once I saw what they were actually doing to their own people and saw it with my own eyes, it really changed my whole mindset. There was no doubt in my mind, we were up against people who didn't have anything better to offer. And I felt comfortable. I was definitely on the right side, and it just helped settle any doubts I'd had about the rights and wrongs of what we were doing. So yeah, it brings back lots of memories. We did quite a few call outs going further east, and very often following tracks up to the border in the minefield. And then, we had to turn back normally because we didn't have permission to cross into Mozambique. So it was frustrating, but we did a lot of walking, and quite a lot of it, we were with national parks, sticks. I don't know. I'm not sure. I remember being a couple of white guys. I think on 1 or 2 occasions, Clem Coetzee might have been involved. but yeah, it was a very good way of reacting, having top trackers and then a good support team with a bit of firepower.
Yeah, that was a must. Because I tell you, it's 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 difficult to tell you how quickly you can lose a spur when you're not sure that you're being looked after.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got your nose to the ground and you're walking ahead in thick bush country, you can walk into a terrorist camp, particularly if they've been walking all night and they're sleeping during the day. You can walk right into a camp
Mm-hmm.
while they're sleeping, and you'll be literally within kicking distance of these guys before any of them wake up. And sometimes all you need is one guy awake in there to wake all the others up and say, "Hang on, guys, they're coming." Uh, it was vital to me. It was absolutely vital that we had the best possible protection stick. I
Mm-hmm.
liked the RAR. I liked the RLI. I liked a lot of these guys going in, but some, I mean, to think that we could be sent out with a bunch of old men on the dad's army, all right, you can't doubt the willingness to go in, but those aren't the people that you want to protect you.
Yeah. I suppose the younger the better, but having said that, in the course of these talks, it's been really interesting learning more about how effective some of the police reserve um, deployments were, and you know these were a lot of fairly elderly farmers and stuff uh, who were involved, but they had that most valuable asset, which is local knowledge, and they knew the people and they knew their way around the area. And so they were actually very, very effective in some cases and pulled off some amazing successes. So yeah, it took all kinds to make it work.
Yeah, but if you were doing the tracking and you're walking into something like that, you want you want to have people
Mm,
who are Vaka, who are up and ready for anything.
mm,
You don't want people. You don't want elderly people doing these jobs.
sure,
They're good
sure.
for roadblocks and things like that. But if I've got my nose to the ground and I'm looking after my trackers on with their noses to the ground, you want to have the best possible protection stick that you can get.
Ron, were you
Clem could
involved
see a
in any of the early incursions through the Zambezi Valley during Op Cauldron, Op Nickel, when they were moving through Chiwori and the national parks areas? And
no,
no,
not at all.
no, they
From
do.
below Kariba, I didn't know that countryside very well. Even in my capacity as a game warden, I very rarely went into the lower valley. Most of my service was done in Matabele land in the Midlands.
Ron, listen, I'm going to call it a day for now. I really appreciate that. I just want, but I'll get the details from you about anybody wanting to buy the books, and we can we can put those up on John will sort that out, and then people can just contact you direct. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people who'd like to read those books of yours.
Well, the game rangers at war were individual things. We went out and we did an operation and we've concluded whether we got back to camp that night. We always used to hitch a ride with whatever helicopters were available. My trackers used to call them their taxis because they reckon if they had been out all day tracking, they wanted to get back to camp for a hot meal and a beer at the bar before anybody else. They didn't want to spend the night lying out in the bush. But this one here has got lots of smaller stories. This one here is a long story. It's a life story
Okay.
of and it tells you about how Rhodesians lived, black and white, and both sides of the conflict. That is the nice thing about the Nahanda book is that
Okay.
it gives you a perspective of that. Just a quickie. I'm writing another one, another full book
Right.
now. It goes back to the time of the land of Ophir of the Bible
Okay.
and the Queen of Sheba, King Solomon's mines. People don't know if you go into all sorts um, of libraries or areas of information, history, people will tell you they don't know where the land of Ophir was. They say it's all over the place. there's no historical evidence to say what it was. So you've got to put it together. The land of Ophir was in fact in the Zambezi Valley, 400 kilometers upstream from where the Zambezi runs into the sea. And after a while from there, they ran out of gold in that area. There was a big mountain there called Fura, which the local people call Fura, which the Arabs call Afur. This is where the land of Afur comes from. And when the land of Afur ran out of gold, they moved up into central Zimbabwe, and they opened up all the gold mines there. You know that in 1890, when the pioneer column came into Rhodesia for the first time, they discovered they got the pioneers to come up, and they gave them prospecting licenses to go out and look for gold.
Yes.
First of all. But they had found holes in the ground built by the ancients. They didn't know who the ancients were. The ancients were the Sabaean Arabs from the Yemen of today. And they moved from the land of Urfa up the Mazoe into the Central Plateau area where the new gold fields were found. And they dug holes into the ground to follow the gold directly into the ground up on the high veld. And when the mining commissioner of the old British South Africa Company, who had issued all the prospecting notices, one of the questions he'd asked in there was, are there any old mines there, holes in the ground built by the ancients, mines? And in the first 3 years of the pioneer occupation, he actually discovered and recorded and pinpointed a total of 75,000 gold mines that had been dug by the ancients, dug by the Sabaean Arabs.
Wow.
And this is all the history of what is now Zimbabwe, of the whole Rhodesians part. It's a real important part of the history, because there were no black people in Africa south of the Zambezi before the 9th century AD. I don't know if you know that. Very few people know that.
Mm-hmm.
The first black people started coming on the migration south through Africa in the year 900. And it's all linked. There are all sorts of historical links between the Zimbabwe of those days and the Yemen of today. And I'm trying to bring all this into it and fit it into the story so that it's a real historical yarn.
Extremely interesting. Very interesting. Well, good luck, Ron. I look forward to that, and I look forward to reading Game Rangers at War. I must say, I'll get a copy. I'll get hold of you and get a copy. But Ron, I'm gonna say thanks for now.
Okay, my pleasure.